it's very possible that the secular crisis of the next civic generation is going to be this one, of the encounter with the realization that not only are we not, as Copernicus demonstrated, the physical center of the entire universe, but the fact of the matter is we're not the only sentient form of highly developed technological life in the universe. This is genuinely going to threaten to dislocate us, because even while we were dislocated from the center of the physical universe by the Copernican revolution, that we still insisted upon holding ourselves in the center of the universe as far as sentient intelligence goes. So this is a major shock to the human system that is in process.
Boom. So I wanted to kind of lead with that because Danny is a wise voice in this space, and he, I think, really summarized it well there, where this is overall a paradigm shift. And you know, I'll throw it to you here, but today we're kind of wrapping it all kind of up and focusing on the future and sort of the implications. And we're going to dive pretty deep here with, you know, specific groups and theoretical agendas. If you've listened up to this point, the other podcasts, and I highly recommend to do that before you jump into this one maybe, but it is what it is if you're here, because this one's going to be one, it can be kind of psychologically abrasive if you just jump right into this. It can be very kind of hard to take in if you haven't really looked at everything before this, the finance component, the other physical evidence component, the historical component, to see that this is logically possible, that they're here, that there are different types of groups with different agendas, and these kind of notions and theories and analysis that he'll present and we'll talk about will be more easier to accept if you've done sort of the work before this, the research before it. You know, this is sort of calculus level, deep down the rabbit hole, red pill type stuff. And you first need to understand the basic mathematics and algebra and geometry before you jumped into this. So that huge sort of caveat qualifier aside, you know, we're still going to go ham on this, and we're going to be like, look, this is what it's saying. I don't care how it sounds. I'm not here to commit you. I'm just, like we said the whole time, just giving you the puzzle pieces. You take it how you want, but this is what the majority of people are saying in these types of groups, these certain things. So, you know, I'm all about, let's just look at it honestly, with an open mind and an open heart. And the key is trying to get to the bottom of it. That's what we're about here. And I think right now this is the best thing. This book does the best as far as like what groups, who are they, and what are they doing here, their agendas. And it doesn't go too far where it's like other certain people maybe in the field who you start to get too speculative down the line.
Yeah, and there's plenty of that. And what I like about Richard Dolan is exactly what you said. He's very meticulous. Like he tries to do his best not to make huge leaps without something to kind of back it up, verify it. And another thing I'll say is, you said that, like, you know, because this is more anecdotal, the meta-analysis that looks at that, you know, that's something that, you know, some people would use as an easy out in order not to look deeper into it. So we have to analyze our biases a little bit, because just so we're clear, I know plenty of people who have no problem taking a look at all the anecdotal evidence about DMT experiences, seeing that there is a structured reality there. It's not just a distortion of this reality, that there are different kinds of beings, far more intelligent, far more powerful in this space, and that while, like you said, there's minutia that changes between testimony, just like in eyewitness testimony, because our memory is not fallible. And I have a theory with some evidence to back that up, that the whole thing about integrating a deep experience later is how you introduce it into your long-term memory. You have the experience, and then as you rehash it in your mind, even if you're rehashing it slightly differently, you're encoding the long-term memory that way. So anyway, with that being said, anecdotal evidence, we don't think that means much in the terms of science. But then why is Imperial College London doing a huge extended state DMT study? Basically, the biggest and only reason why you would do a study on extended DMT, and their best explanation is like, there are so many people that have these accounts of encountering other dimensional beings in these spaces by taking DMT. Yeah. And I want to relate this later to something that I just spent, you know, the better part of a week with Charles Eisenstein and some good friends. And I asked him, what do you think of this, UFO, UAP phenomena? He gave a really interesting answer as to why the propulsion systems, just the feats that these crafts may be able to carry out, how it could make sense that some people see it and some people don't. Some people accept it and some people don't. And it really has to do with this idea that there is one singular objective reality and all of us see it just with slightly different faculties,
Right.
and that slightly different colors it.
Different
And
lens.
yeah, and he says, listen, if we're going to take anything from quantum physics, it's that one singular or objective reality is far more fluid, if there at all, in his opinion. And so
Right.
we can get into that lately. But when we're talking about anecdotal evidence, I just want to say, even Imperial College London found the anecdotal evidence of trip reports of DMT users so overwhelming that they raised millions of dollars to put people in that state longer so they could catch their bearings and maybe potentially catch a conversation or have more time in the presence of some of these beings. That's what science is doing today.
Yeah.
Right. So let's
serious-
just
I
take
mean,
it
yeah,
all
I
with
mean,
a grain of
and-
salt and open our minds.
Yeah. There's serious people studying this stuff, and there's serious people, like we said, now coming out talking about this UAP subject, from scientists to public officials to defense officials. And okay, fine. If that's what it takes for certain people to really start taking it seriously, I get it. I understand that justification. But no matter how you get there, if you're ready now to start asking the question, okay, I don't think this is Russia or China, and I do think these are actually some form of advanced intelligence, whether it's extra dimensional or just coming from a few galaxies away. The bottom line is there's an intelligence. There's probably some form of hierarchy with each group, similar to us, just way more advanced on all different levels. So DOLAN, we'll jump into it now. He's going to start breaking down his analysis.
But I can tell you what I tried to do. Let me take this off here. First, I worked very hard to gather the best evidence of what is probably the most difficult phenomenon that I can think of, and that's encounter cases of people with alleged or apparent non-human entities. So that means alien abduction cases and all other types of encounters. And we all know that this is a tricky area, to say the least. It's a tricky area. So for that reason, and a long time, I tried to avoid getting too deep into this topic, into what I thought the aliens were, what they were trying to do, and on and on. It's like I couldn't avoid it, but I also really didn't want to go deep into it. I mean, for me, I've always been a believer in sticking closely to verified facts in my writing. As any of you who have followed me, you know this. But here's the thing. There's always a need, and there's always a place for analysis that includes extrapolation and some speculation. I think that's totally valid, especially in an area like UFOs and potentially aliens, in which so much information simply is not available to us. Even now, after all these years, we're just still missing so much that we want to have. So we need to speculate if we really want to create a viable picture of what is going on, a scenario that makes sense, based on the best evidence also that is available to us, all of those things.
So we just kind of covered a lot of that, and that's, we'll kind of jump to the next video here quick. But basically, he's just giving his rationale for why he did this book, because he is a very serious investigator. And, just like theoretical physics, why do we need theoretical physics to exist? Because it's important to theorize and push the experimental physics and mechanics of engineering to try to match these theories. And so this is essentially what we're doing, but you can do it in a very scientific, serious way, which I think he did I think he did a very good job in this book doing that. So let's jump right to the next one.
What I've tried to do is identify what types of beings that people encounter, what the capabilities of those beings appear to be, how long they seem to have been here, and why they are here. And also, to the extent possible, what are their relationships to each other? That is, what are their goals, if any? Are there good guys and bad guys out there? And if so, can we identify them? Is there a long-range plan? All of these types of questions. So to do that, the first thing I tried to do was to take the long view of the interactions that people seem to have been having with these beings over many, many years, going back into ancient times. After all, if one or more group has been interacting with us for a long time, that might speak a lot toward their relationship to us. So toward that end, I actually start the book by examining a little known and definitely controversial claim that our genetics, that is human beings' genetics, were tampered with and essentially enhanced or modified roughly 40,000 years ago. Now, this is based on the evidence of something known as the D allele of a gene called the microcephalin gene. And this is a gene that controls much of human brain development. Geneticists all seem to agree that we obtained this allele quite recently in our past. They can only give a range at this point, and it's roughly on the low end of like 15,000 years, maybe 20,000 years on the low side, and up to about 60,000 years on the high side. Generally, you hear them splitting the difference and coming to 37.5 thousand years, which is right down the middle of their estimate. But it could be 30,000, it could be 45,000. You get the idea. So one thing about this allele, the geneticists all agree that our species acquired it from an outside source, from an external source. So that is, it came through interbreeding. I don't know how or why they argue this, but that seems to be a settled issue for them. So, okay. The question then is, who's the daddy? So most people would assume it's the Neanderthal, since it's well known that human beings did interbreed with Neanderthals during that period of time. It's a reasonable assumption, except for one thing. We have had access to Neanderthal DNA for a while now, and there are actually quite a few samples of it that are well preserved. Specialists have been looking specifically for this gene and this allele, and the fact is, it doesn't seem to be there. And it's not for lack of them trying. They have been trying. I've read a number of the studies about this. So now maybe it is there. Maybe one day in 10 years or 20 years from now, maybe they'll find it. But there's a good chance they won't. There's been very thorough searching so far, and there's no luck. There actually was another human species around back then, a group known as the Denisovans. They were very closely related to Neanderthals. They looked a lot like them, very minor differences, but they're specifically separate genetically. And we have a little bit less, we have quite a lot less data on them. But similarly, there's no DNA connection to this gene or allele that's been found. And the studies linking that to Denisovans have been very, like the scientists basically said, it doesn't look like it's there. So now I'm mentioning all of this in a book on the alien agenda is why? Because the obvious possible conclusion is that if it wasn't the Neanderthals and it wasn't the Denisovans, then we've got this from some external source. And the question that I'm asking is, could that source be extraterrestrial?
Interesting. I was just looking for, I got the book Denisovan Origins. So he called them Denisovans or Denisovans. But basically, that is a hominid group from the Altai Mountains in Russia. And they're basically, they were known to be able to withstand cold and hypoxia, low oxygen levels in the Altai Mountains. They were loners. They didn't travel in huge groups together. And interestingly enough, we only know about the Denisovans mainly because of a finger fragment, like a finger bone from a female Denisovan. I think, I could be wrong, but maybe 40,000 years ago was how long that was.
In that cave in Siberia or wherever?
In the cave in Siberia, in the Altai Mountains.
Yeah.
And so Graham Hancock did the foreword for the book that Andrew Collins wrote called Denisovan Origins. Really good book. Gets a lot into Native American mythology as well, of the Cree and the Ojibwa that have Denisovan DNA. I don't want to go too off on it because he said this D allele gene was not in the Denisovan DNA. So that's pretty interesting. But the one thing about the Denisovan DNA that's found throughout South America more, and then only in the Cree and the Ojibwa up around the Great Lakes in North America, is that when, let's say, the Cree, who are also called the Nehuin, and Cree is almost like the Sioux. Sioux, the indigenous didn't call themselves that, the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, and it's almost derogatory. But anyway, the Cree or the Nehuin, they have this guy, Wilfred Buck, who talks about traveling between the stars with their star brothers and sisters from other star systems, and doing so with the power and the knowledge and the maps of wormholes. And I already got into this in Awakening Infinity show. But I find that really interesting that he mentions that, and this is roughly around the same time. But there's a gene outside of the Denisovans as
Right.
well.
Right.
And so the last thing I want to end with is that the Cree and the Ojibwa, especially the Cree, they had it's called the Grand Medicine Society. It's their shamanic caste. So they were actually like, they had a caste made up of a shamanic society. They had their own tents, but then they stayed with the tribe. And then there was this other group that were far larger, and they were called the Jessikid. And they were a shamanic caste of much more sophisticated magicians as they knew it, and they could perform far deeper healing. So when the Grand Medicine Society couldn't figure out how to heal somebody or something they needed that shamanic prowess for, they would go to the Jessikid, who were far bigger in stature and are believed to have the Denisovan DNA. So that's an interesting tie-in. I would have like that clicked. It would have clicked a lot more had the Denisovan DNA had the DLL gene. But now this could be slightly different as well. So I'm just going to keep that in the back of my mind. You guys do the same. If anyone has any more information on that, let me know. But that was a good clip.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, that the allele is a really critical thing that he pointed out in this book that really stuck with me, and that's a pretty strong piece of evidence to use for the whole ancient astronaut theory, the ancient alien theory of have we been altered in some way genetically in the past. And I mean, that is, as he said, and as geneticists would say, only something that happens through interbreeding from an external source. So and we'll get into present day, this whole idea of what they're doing on these craft, but a lot of it is still tied in with procreation of different ways and artificial insemination. And it seems to be a major through line that there's a real reason to want to be mixing with humans, essentially.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.